Hi, friends and colleagues in Somerset. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin Caraher. I'm Professor Emeritus of Food and Health Policy at City University, and I've had a long association with Somerset and hugely admiring of the work that goes on then there. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today. I've had a previous appointment. If you'd come first, I would have been in Somerset, but I had something else in my diary for 3 or 4 months. I'm recording this on Wednesday, the I'm just looking at the date, sorry, on Wednesday, the 12th of October. So, a week before the conference, and many things could change. We've seen with this government U-turns in today's paper. There's concerns about school meals, there's concerns about the uplift in universal credit, there's concerns about the rise in poverty. And what I say today may change within a week, but nonetheless, I'm going to go through some issues. I'm going to spend 5 to 7 minutes setting out some of the problems, and then 5 to 7 minutes probably looking at some of the things we maybe could do and lessons from elsewhere, indeed, and indeed what Somerset could do. So hopefully that will be useful to you. Okay, so we're in the middle of the worst crisis we've ever seen, worse than 2008. And one of the things that's happened is we've not learned a lot since 2008. The scale of the problem now is different. We're seeing 15 million people in extreme poverty. The estimates are from Joseph Rowntree Foundation today. Within a year, there will be an extra million going into extreme poverty. If we don't take certain actions, if we don't increase welfare benefits in line with inflation. Currently, inflation is running at 10 to 11%, of which only 3 to 4% are due to food and fuel. The other 6 are more local and internal issues. But nonetheless, basics in food have gone up by 10 to 11%, and some basics have gone up by 20% within that overall 10 to 11% increase. And that's a huge problem for people. We've seen increase in food bank usage with a decrease in both donations, because people themselves are suffering. So donations within the supermarkets have gone down, but also donations from the supermarkets of surplus or waste food has gone down because the supermarkets have tackled waste. So we're facing a crisis there as well, while the government are not doing much structurally to address food security and food poverty. I mean, this is a really, really big issue. And as I said, 14, 15 million people are food insecure and extreme poverty at the moment, and that's likely to go up given the current crisis as people's jobs are threatened, and people are facing real crisis within that. Our wages have remained stagnant, so there's a real cut for people having to manage. Data from Counter World Panel shows that in the UK overall people haven't shifted their purchasing patterns that much. They're buying less, but they've a slight increase in frozen food, but not much. But people have cut down in other ways. Cut down on their Netflix subscription and things like that, or ordering in food is another problem. And of course, we're seeing huge problems in the hospitality sector linked to fuel prices, linked to the whole problem of what's happening with the increase there, and pubs, restaurants, etc., having to manage increases in heating bills. That's going to be a major problem on the coming, and that has a fallout with jobs. And in Somerset, pubs are seen as social areas, restaurants can be social areas, so people will lose some of those, and that's really disturbing. So, pretty bleak picture in terms of what's happening with this government. A number of things are happening. They're backtracking on lots of the policy initiatives that were promised around obesity. The National Food Strategy, which was compiled by Henry Dimbleby, they've largely kicked that to touch and responded to some minor issues in it, but not comprehensively. I was a slight critic of the National Food Strategy, but insofar as it went, it was good. And it tackled health and it tackled environmental and sustainability issues, but they've just kicked those to touch. The basis for that seems to be ideological. It's an anti-nanny state, except if you're Jacob Rees-Mogg and you're obviously in favour of nannies. But overall, they dislike this notion of telling people what to do. Now, we may see some backtracking on that in the next couple of days, because we've seen a Roundtree report this morning. We've seen a number of reports on school meals, and we've seen Jimmy Oliver lobbying at number 10 Downing Street yesterday, Tuesday the 10th of October. And maybe they'll backtrack on some of that. But the omens are not great. They've just appointed a new minister, a new health minister. Teresa Coffey's just appointed a new minister for health, who's an MP, a doctor, who's a member of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, who on 2 previous occasions has voted against extending free school meals, of which the college she belongs to, the Royal Society, I'm looking at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, are in favour of. So she's got a voting record against extending welfare policies. So this is an interesting time, also a disturbing time. I mean, I find it I'm smiling, but I'm actually at another level very distraught about all of this because people are suffering. So it's really quite worrying. I think in terms of agriculture, we're seeing a number of things happening. The government promised that they would treat agriculture with kid gloves and that trade deals would not be done which would sacrifice agriculture. Now, that's not true. There's been two major trade deals done, one with New Zealand and one with Australia. And in the long term, they're going to damage British farming because over a period of 5 to 7 years, they're going to reduce tariffs so people from Australia with lower food standards in terms of slaughter and transport, will be able to flood the UK market with cheaper beef. It won't be cheap, I think. So we're not seeing much protection of agriculture, which is a huge issue for Somerset. We've also recently seen what was called the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which was a continuation of CAP. What it done was it basically paid people to do set aside and to do environmental goods for the land. Now, this largely benefited large landowners, not farmers, landowners. I was at a wedding last week, and on this estate, there was a lot of elms work going on, environmental land management scheme systems going on, planting trees for urbanites to go and have weddings in the country, and a little bit of farming, but very little. At the other end of the scale, a lot of small farmers, particularly in the organic sector, have leveraged elms in conjunction with food growing and food security. So it wasn't all bad. And the talk in government was, oh, we'll just continue elms. Now, recently, they've just stopped all meetings with recipients of elms. So that we think that they're going to rescind the elms project or the elms scheme and the grants that go under it. In one way, the positive thing about that might be that they look to farmers producing more food and paying for food growing rather than just maintaining the land. That's not either or. I think you can grow food and protect the land. So hopefully it would do both. And the current climate, the current crisis and Ukraine has made them aware of that. So, I mentioned Ukraine. So the fallout from that is we're getting less fertilizer. Fertilizer costs have gone up for a whole lot of ancillary reasons. So farmers are now paying 5 times the price they were a year ago for fertilizer, adding less to the fields. So crops will reduce. So therefore profits will reduce. So farming has a really difficult time ahead of it, and rural areas, and poverty in rural areas is particularly manifest. The Ukrainian crisis has, it's driven all sorts of other things. There's a shortage of AdBlue, which comes from uric acid, and China has restricted exports of uric acid, and AdBlue goes into diesel. I'm not really quite sure the technical issues, but it goes into diesel, I think, to cut some of the emissions from the diesel. And we've seen problems with transport of food across Europe, but also in Australia, where a shortage of AdBlue has led to shortages of food in West Australia, which is a very long food chain. It goes from Melbourne to West Australia, which is, I think, 2,000-3,000 kilometres. It's a huge length of food chain. So the Ukrainian war and invasion has triggered lots of other things. China itself has declared itself a food self-sufficient area. It's cut down on exports. because it is trying to make its own population self-sufficient in food. Having said that, what's called a Belt and Roads Initiative, China is investing offshoring in countries such as Africa, and China controls about 60% of world grain. We talk about the Ukrainian crisis, and the grain from the Ukraine and the Black Sea area traditionally has fed 60 million people. And that's, of course, been cut down significantly with the war. But the consequence of that is places like China and India are restricting their grain exports because they're keeping it for their own populations. So we will see increases in grain prices across the board. Okay, bleak picture. The positive things, I think a lot of things have come from the COVID lockdown and the post-COVID crisis. And one of the things, and it strikes me this is, I think probably true of Somerset, from my experience of Somerset, is community initiatives have re-emerged. Around early 2000s, we saw lots and lots of community initiatives. And they died out over time because of a lack of funding. Public health has not been funding community initiatives. The general area of public health has received less funding in recent years, so they've not had money to put into public health initiatives around food. But during COVID, we saw community initiatives growing up, and community initiatives may be sometimes linked with hospitality who was forced to shut down, so a local restaurant would turn into something else. I think it's interesting to see how many of those will survive the crisis, because what you get is you get problems with funding and you get volunteer fatigue. You know, people volunteering because they had some spare time during COVID, but now they're back at work. Will they have that time? But nonetheless, I think that is a way forward, a real way forward for most of us to build on community initiatives and to locate solutions locally. I think national government are not going to provide many of the solutions, but I think regionally and locally we can. I think that requires two things. And I think, again, this is where in my past Somerset Food Links, all the work in Somerset was really great around supporting volunteers, providing training, but also providing small amounts of funding. And hiving off or selecting projects that could stand on a commercial footing and maybe reinvesting some of that money back into community and other pilots and initiatives. The lessons I think around community initiatives are pretty clear, that people do need some level of funding. I mean, sometimes that's a couple of £100 a year, so you need a slush fund just to give people some startup money to get on with the project. You need some training for them, creating community links across projects. I think that's really important. And then the next thing is linking with local food suppliers. So creating food hubs, food delivery points, drop-off points, again, which I know was, and I'm not up to speed on Somerset, I'm sorry, I'm talking more generally now. But I think you probably have that infrastructure in Somerset. Maybe you need to go look for some funding from some of the trust funds or somebody who will give you some money to develop that work. So that's, in one sense, my solutions and the way out of this. I think that I hope you have a great conference. I hope you discuss some of these things, and I'd like you, maybe whoever's organising this particular session, I've tried to keep it brief. I'm now on 13 minutes, which is pretty short for me. I can talk for 3 hours. That think about, maybe just in your groups, or turn to the person beside you and think about, what are the strengths of the local food system in Somerset? So what's there already? Number 2, what do we need to do to build that strength? And 3, what are the barriers and how do we overcome those barriers? So just what's there, what's strong, what do we need to do, and what are the potential barriers and how do we overcome those barriers? So if you just spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about that, and maybe somebody, one of the organisers can take this and take the feedback and compile it, and it'll maybe help structure the day. So thank you. I hope you have a great I'm really sad I'm not there. I am. I love coming to Somerset, but this time I had a previous engagement, as I said. So good luck and bye.